Hello, everybody. It is 2:00, so I should go ahead and get started. I am Karen Fradley, and I'm really excited to be here today and to present on the topic of HiCap in the Gen Ed classroom. Ideas of how to use a hybrid approach for the highly capable services. If you wouldn't mind in the chat, would you please include your school district and the role that you have in working with highly capable? Are you a HiCap teacher, a Gen Ed teacher, cluster teacher, administrator? Okay, so as I said, my name is Karen Fradley, and I live and currently work in the Bellingham School District. I'm also participate on the board for WATAG, which is the Washington Association for Educators of Talented and Gifted, and I am the education chair currently. So there are multiple ways of getting in touch with me if you ever want more information on what I'm talking about today or have any reason to want to contact me in the future. So you can contact me through my WATAG email or through Bellingham Schools. Okay, so I guess I should have included back on that previous slide that my background is actually in special ed, and I've weaved this path of special ed and literacy intervention with it just seems to kind of come in and out of gifted education and advocacy. So I've really just found myself really learning about the whole spectrum, the whole picture. So within, for example, the past 4 years, I had a year in the Cedar Woolley School District as the SPED and LAP resource teacher. And then my second year there as the gifted teacher for kindergarten through 6th grade at 7 different schools, trying to help that district create a model or transition their model to, reach all students, be more inclusive, and increase access, of course, with just one teacher. So many of districts have, of course, limited resources, and the districts I've worked for in Washington are no different. Then with our pandemic year, I worked in Centralia School District, and I taught the gifted program there, 3rd through 8th grade, 100% remote. And a lot of what I'm talking about today are my philosophy of how to reach students and blend with Gen Ed teachers, collaboration goes way back to, experiences I've had for over 10 years. But I feel like the pandemic really forced our hand for, making this more of a way of work, a regular way of work. And I would really love to see this continue. So that was the inspiration for creating this presentation today. And then my current role in Bellingham School District is back to the special ed and LAP resource room. So you can see that I kind of go in this, I don't know, would it be a circle or would it be a spiral? But, I kind of weave through both ends. And I'm really excited about the momentum right now in Washington with MTSS and with UDL. And you'll see some of that weaved into this presentation today. Okay, so for our agenda today, in the next 45 minutes, I think is how much time I have, I am going to try to cover a lot. And I did share a link for this presentation. It's way up in the top of the chat. I want you to have access to this presentation so that you have a way to contact me. My email address was up there on the second slide. If you ever want more information, but I've also included a lot of resources and links in this presentation today, and I want you to be able to access all of that in the future. So there's a lot, as you've probably heard this many times in many of our sessions over this summit. It's a lot to squeeze into a little bit of time. So, and just know that if you are interested in any tidbits of things that you hear that you'd like to go down that rabbit hole someday, there are tons of resources to go deeper in all directions of what we're going to talk about today. But basically, I want to cover a little bit of the background of the importance of having an array of services in your HiCap programs. I want to go over just, what am I talking about when I say a hybrid approach? And then utilizing the digital systems to increase communication, differentiation, and engagement with not only students, teachers as well. And then I will leave time for some questions at the end as well. Okay, so the why, of course, comes from our Washington laws and regulations. And this wording has been in our WACs for programming for highly capable students for a very long time. There was a revision to the code in 2018, and that revision included the wording that for highly capable students, access to accelerated learning and enhanced instruction is access to a basic education. And this, to me, kind of translates to funding, that more and more districts are pulling funding for their HiCap program out of the funding for gen ed teachers. We're seeing a lot in the state, if your district isn't already, with utilizing a cluster model where, gen ed teachers are being asked to basically provide services and meet the unique needs and capabilities of our gifted students. And the one way to be doing that is with a continuum of services. The continuum is something that should be offered from kindergarten through 12th grade based on that original wording of the WACs from, I believe it was like 1984. So with that in mind, we're seeing a shift, but honestly, that wording has always been there. And so I feel like there's just currently been more of an emphasis or importance placed on that wording of a continuum. And of course, MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, is also kind of making a wave right now in Washington. And so you will recognize the triangle from the MTSS tiers. If we can think about a tiered system of supports for our gifted kids, that is, the direction that I see a lot of programs going in this state. So over the past, over the past 4 districts that I've worked in, each one of them has transitioned from a pull-out model, one size fits all, this is what we do for all gifted students, to more of what are the unique needs and capabilities of the individual student, and how can we provide that array of services. So I wanted to find out from you if you would put in the chat where you kind of think that your district is in moving towards this idea of an array of services. You could maybe rate your schools from 1 to 5. Like if you're already there and you guys are like totally experts at this, you'd be a 5. And if your district is one size fits all pull-out model and nothing is changing, that would be a 1. So if you could indicate in the chat where your districts are in that. Thank you, Lindsley. Nice, Evan. Good to hear. Which district is that? Might need to talk to people there. 2, 3, let's see. Evan. Oh, I didn't cite. Let's see. Kennewick. I'm going to write that one down. Thank you. right. Well, great to hear. And you can see we're all different places here. But what I really wanted to start with that because for the background of a hybrid model to really work, I feel like the mindset of collaboration and uniting the HiCap specialist or HiCap teacher with the gen ed teachers, rather than these like separate islands. It's really a mindset of, unity, of bringing this together. And so some ways that it could look like in your classroom is cluster grouping, curriculum compacting, inquiry projects, subject acceleration, and consultation with a HiCap teacher or specialist. So my question for you on this slide, I mentioned to you that I am on the board for WayTag, and one of my jobs duties as the education chair is that we offer monthly webinars. And so I'm always interested in kind of feeling out what teachers, gen ed teachers, gifted teachers are interested in learning more about, so that I can cultivate that within our free webinars. So I'll give you more information about those webinars at the end too. If you wouldn't mind, in the chat, do you see a topic on this list that sticks out to you that would really be something you'd want to learn more about, or you feel urgent about? Just add that in the chat if you don't mind. Yes. I'm kind of making a poll on my paper here. Curriculum compacting, totally. Yeah. Yep. I agree. Okay. And just to kind of wrap up this first section about the why, I love this quote, and I really think it emphasizes the fact that collaboration, the mindset of bringing together our resources and utilizing them for all kids, is this shift that is happening in this state. And if it isn't yet come to your district, I feel like it's on its way, because I've seen this, happen in multiple districts, moving from that island of, you go down to the gifted classroom to inclusive services in the gen ed classroom, and partnering, with gen ed teachers. Okay, so the what is, what am I talking about with hybrid instruction? So hybrid instruction, the definition, if you were to just Google, what does that mean? It blends in-person instruction with online activities. We are all really experienced in that, right? Thanks to the pandemic. But what this looked like for me and my programming and utilizing this for gifted services was utilizing the time in a gen ed classroom to work on projects that are designed specifically for the nature and needs of the HiCap students in that room. And so there needed to be some communication between the gen ed teacher and myself for the intentional design of the material, and also the where and when and how students work on the work, what they're producing, how they're producing it, and if there was any overlap with the standards that were being covered in the classroom, if there is any way that these students have already demonstrated. We use the iReady data for reading and for math to identify that students didn't need to be working on this section of what you were doing with the rest of your classroom. So we kind of designed something intentionally for those students that would give them a way to apply those skills in a real world problem solving type of capacity. So we were absolutely leveraging the digital systems to increase communication and engagement. And again, not only communicating with the teachers, but being able to leverage that with students. Students had not previously known how to use their student emails, and they were being encouraged to, if they came across a problem, they need to advocate. That self-advocacy and self-regulation that you hear talked about in UDL. They were given the responsibility to, work on these parts of projects, taking ownership of the work. And then when they needed help, they might send me an email. I also, how this hybrid thing looked was that something was designed. I had a Google Classroom set up, and then we had a regular scheduled check-in time. And depending on the student, depending on the project, depending on the classroom, depending on a bunch of logistical things, I either met with individual students at a regular set time, usually once or twice per week, or I had a small group that were put together homogeneously, not necessarily all the same grade level, but they could have all been working on the same project, and they were all scheduled for the same time. So they had a small group, or there was a large group that met at one time once per week. And that really actually provided some of that social interaction, where I hear, when we move a lot of our gifted services into the classroom, one of the biggest concerns I hear is about that socialization with other gifted students. And so by utilizing where we held a Zoom class during the school day, those students might go in the hallway or they might go in the back of the classroom, and then they're still able to participate with their gifted peers on a specific project, but not necessarily having to leave the classroom for the whole day. And so that really worked. And that is what the hybrid instruction model that I'm talking about today, what that would look like. So there were a couple elements on there that were really, really essential to making it work. And those are things, that any time we're going to try to implement a new model, it would have to be worked on over time. And that includes that collaborative mindset that I've already talked about a couple of times. The communication, just improving our ability to share the objectives and plan collaboratively. So that communication piece, and then appropriately designing curriculum. That gets back to the data, which I'll get to that in a second. But when we're leveraging digital systems to increase communication and engagement, that led me to what are we calling digital systems? So I really liked this definition that I found from Cambridge International. So I wanted you to read it and then share in the chat what stands out to you in this definition of digital systems. Thanks, Rebecca. Digital systems that encourage active learning and exploration, right? It's not just using different apps on the iPad necessarily, right? It's kind of the purpose and intentionality, is that a word? Of what we're putting in front of our kids, right? Yeah. Thanks, Paige. Whoops, wait, did I do that right? No, I didn't. Okay, hold on. Going back and forth between two monitors. There we go. Okay. So coming back to that idea that there are many of our highly capable students need multiple tiers of support too. You would use your data. You could, when I say data, I'm talking about your iReady scores, but also pre-testing the observations and portfolio or performance data that you were kind of always assessing, right? It's sort of like our nature. It's like everything we do, we're taking in, how do kids respond to this? And so you would want to be considering who is showing mastery of the standards, using the iReady data. What is that showing you? Who needs something more? Who's ready for something more? Who shows the capacity for acceleration? And mastery and acceleration are not necessarily exactly the same thing. So there could be students who learn at a faster pace. They may still have things that need to be learned, but they don't need so much practice at it as other students in the classroom. So that would be the difference between acceleration and having already mastered the standards. How can I add depth and complexity? Using questioning. The depth and complexity icons are actually a tool in and of themselves, but I think at the heart of the depth and complexity icons is being able to utilize a way to increase the types of questions, increase the rigor of the questions that you're asking, to be able to make different types of divergent or convergent connections for students and pull out that deeper thinking. And then, of course, what are students curious about? We are really trying to move away from this one size fits all. If any of you have attended the session with Elise, what is her last name? I wrote it down here. Elise Bellinger Bailey on the UDL over this summit. I feel like she would agree so much with this slide as well, that aiming for average, it's not a thing. We're not doing this anymore, right? So of these topics, this is kind of a question again that is related to those webinars. What would you feel like you need more information about? What of these topics would you want to know more about? How to bring curiosity into your classroom, how to use data to determine mastery of standards, how to use your data to increase or find appropriate acceleration. Yeah. Yeah. Depth and complexity. I'm a big fan of those depth and complexity icons. Have any of you heard of them? It's great for all kids. That is one link I actually did not put on anywhere in this. So the depth and complexity icons are a tool in and of themselves. So you might want to just write yourself a note to look that up if you're interested. Okay, so here's my quote to end this section. And this book right here is a link to the Amazon to buy it. But I don't get any, pushback or whatever kickback from that. But I just wanted you to know that that's where the link is in the icon. Okay, so I'm reading this book this summer, and it's been just a wonderful read. It is not necessarily written just for gifted kids. It's written for all students. And Daniel Willingham is a cognitive psychologist and a professor at the University of Virginia. And in his book, Why Don't Students Like School?, he describes that much of the reason that students don't like school, aside from the social challenges, has to do with the fact that school rarely finds the sweet spot between the to be learned content and the being too hard and too easy. And that's the part of his book that just really, really like stands out to me. So this is one of his quotes from the book, that people are naturally curious, but we are not naturally good thinkers. And unless the cognitive conditions are right, we would avoid thinking. If you can think of an underachieving gifted student from your classroom, I feel like if you read this book, you're going to have a like, oh, okay, I understand zone of proximal development. Yes, but it's that, and it's more than that too. And I think that it comes back to that. I mean, I keep feeling for myself like how UDL is interwoven into all of this. That really knowing our students and planning for their differences, which is, basically the framework of UDL. And if you think of the zone of proximal development, like what are they ready to be learning? Just a lot of similarity there. And that it isn't going to be exactly the same for all kids. Just because they're 5, they shouldn't all necessarily be doing exactly the same thing, right? Or maybe they're not that they shouldn't be, but maybe they aren't doing exactly the same thing. Okay, so the how, utilizing digital systems to increase communication, differentiation, and engagement. So the rest of these slides, I have some tools that I've created or observations or lessons that I've learned on how to implement this. I've been, as I mentioned, it's been 3 different districts that I've worked in that it just kind of happened that they were in the place where they were ready to shift. And I happened to be there at the right time. They're ready to shift from this one size fits all pull out model to an inclusive model. One of the schools was an IB elementary school. The other 2 schools were both Title I districts. And for different reasons, the IB program really doesn't like having kids taken out of the classroom. The other 2 districts were motivated to change their model based on the WACs and the Washington laws and regulations. But regardless, all 3 districts were in this place where they're moving from taking kids out of the classroom and doing this one thing with them 1 day a week model that no other kids in that classroom get exposed to having the kids stay in the classroom. And how do we kind of bring more of those strategies and experiences to all kids in the classroom? Okay, so there are some communication essentials. I have to say that that mindset that I started talking about at the beginning of this presentation, the mindset of collaboration, has to be in place in order for any of this stuff to work, right? We all have to be open to the idea that we're not going to be working on islands. We have to keep our doors open to each other, basically. And so some of the things that I've done that help in increasing communication is that my email groups that I send weekly messages out to parents about what we're doing, what we've covered in class, and how they can follow up with things at home. I always appreciated when my son's teacher would send things about like questions you could ask at the dinner table, so I try to provide things like that in my emails. But I add teachers onto that email that I send out to parents. And I want to keep all of the gen ed teachers informed as far as what are we covering in this project, or if they are pulled out for a couple minutes into my classroom. Or what I did last year was it was a pull out, but they were in their building. They just came to me on a Zoom call and then they went back into their classrooms. So in that example, the gen ed teachers aren't necessarily witnessing, what we talk about in that time. So making sure that everybody is just informed, making sure that the Google Classrooms that are created are accessible to all the teachers. whose kids you're working with. Did I say that sentence correctly? I've had teachers be able to go in and assist students who might have a little bit of struggle with one part of an assignment. Because they have access to the Google Classroom, the teachers can open it and can read it and say, oh, you just have this misunderstanding with this one little thing. And it really just keeps it all moving. And it also provides a way to unite, when I just feel so strongly that when, kids do this too, when they hear their two different teachers saying the same thing, it really helps to unite us for like that common purpose we have with the kids. And then these are 3 documents that I've created and used in the different schools that I've worked in. So you may see Centralia's header, but you also may see Cedar Woolley's header on these. The eligibility determination form, which your district probably has a copy of this, but the gen ed teacher should be able to see what was the determination, what information, what data. Let me see if I click on this, will it open? Oh, you know what? It is only sharing the one tab I have opened. If I click on it in here, no, it doesn't do that. Okay, well, sorry. When you use the presentation, all of these links are active for you, but in Hopin, I'm only sharing my tab instead of, anyways, I can't show it to you right now, but I'm looking at it and I'm going to tell you about it. It has all of their cognitive scores on it, plus any other data that was used to make the determination. And based on our, back to our laws and regulations, there should be multiple sources of data that are used in making the determination. So basically the idea is just sharing this information with the gen ed teacher so that you know what your students' strengths are as well. That's the big idea. The next link is the student learning plan. And this is something that is not a requirement across the state. It's just a good idea. And so it could be something that you may discuss with your administration, you may discuss with your gen ed, or not gen ed, HiCap teacher or the supervisor of HiCap. And you may need to participate in it in order to make this thing happen. But the student learning plan, you can think of that as like the IEP for the HiCap student. And on the student learning plan, you're going to have specific objectives that, based on the student's strengths, would be appropriate for them over that year. And the student learning plan shows also the data that these decisions are based on. It's a working plan. It's not a legal document like an IEP is, because these forms are just more like a good idea than they are a requirement by law. And it gives the ability for all parties who are working with this student to be able to, look at how can we all support this student. And it's not just we're working on these skills again in that HiCap classroom. These are things that can be embedded into your classroom as well. And then the learning targets are something that I created. I wonder if I stop sharing, then click on this and then share. This is also something that is not required by law, but I found that I wasn't really able to do my job unless I had the objectives. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? And this would be something that the HiCap committee, every district has a HiCap committee, would determine what are the objectives that we have for our HiCap program. And then I used a couple different resources and created this rubric. So there are, let's go through them. There's research skills. What? Am I scrolling? Hold on. There we go. It's just a little bit of a delay to my mouse. Sorry. Reflection and metacognition. Critical and creative thinking. Social emotional skills. And then the last one at the bottom is presentation and technology. Sorry, my mouse is a little bit delayed, which is making this kind of funny to share with you right now. Sorry. And then just like a rubric, it has the skill level across the top. So you can see that these are not necessarily like grade level standards based, although there is sort of there's a weaving in, and some of these things can be found in your grade level standards, especially, speaking and listening skills. Under the critical thinking and research skills, some of that is actually found in your social studies standards. So this stuff does overlap and combine, but it also goes beyond your grade level standards. And so having a tool like this that really gives, why and what should separate, or maybe not separate, but define what we're doing for our high cap students. This could be something that helps build that communication and shared responsibility between all parties. Again, these things can totally be covered in a gen ed classroom. Are there any comments while I'm switching back to my presentation? If you would put in the chat, please, any comments you have about these learning targets. Oh, okay. There we go. Yes, everything, Sarah, there is a link to this presentation, and I'll put it again in the chat. The entire presentation is being shared with you so that you can access all of these links. So the rubrics is one of the links on the slide. I'm on the wrong monitor. Okay, there's the link again if you haven't already gotten the link to this presentation. Okay. All right. So I've mentioned a couple times in this presentation, like this overlap with UDL. And on the next slide or two, you're going to see the words differentiate. And so I just felt like if any of you attended that training by Elise Bellinger-Bailey, it was really exceptional. How she explained the background of UDL, the framework of UDL. It is really an approach or a framework to lesson design and differentiation as defined by Elise Bellinger-Bailey and many other people in the UDL world. They define differentiation as a response to learner needs. I feel like I have always differentiated by planning differently for different students, which really sounds a whole lot like what UDL is. Plan the lesson in anticipation to student needs, build the tools and methods of differentiation right into the lesson. And this occurs prior to instruction. You're making a lot of decisions intentionally right? So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. This is also sourced. The image itself has a link on it, but I felt like that kind of didn't come up easily. So I also put the hot link there with the word source. That's a hot link to the source in case you wanted to read any more about that information, or if you missed Elise's training. Okay, so differentiation engagement is essentials. I talked a lot already about being able to use your data to match student strengths to projects. So you would utilize your iReady data in the same way that we're talking with MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, and that triangle. It's the same thing, but we're looking at where have students already mastered or excelled, and how could they go further? So it's the same idea, but sort of in the different other direction. One of the things that I noticed is that there are a lot of, I'm going to go back 2 slides since I forgot to say something. With these shared documents, the eligibility determination, the student learning plan, and the learning target rubric, I think that using these in collaboration with gen ed teachers, sharing this information with gen ed teachers builds capacity in our gen ed teachers to understand the nature and needs of our gifted learners. And I definitely see that there's, compared with, I taught for 18 years in Florida. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning. That's where I'm coming from. And I earned my gifted endorsement in the state of Florida. The opportunity for earning that endorsement is offered in every district across the whole state. And I just feel like the access to that learning is not as easy here in Washington. And so it's really important for us to be working together to support each other's knowledge on this topic of how to best meet those unique needs. What are those unique needs? How do we identify and also extinguish the myths? There are a lot of myths about gifted kids. So when we are using our data to match student strengths to projects, and then the second one, continuing regular check-ins with students, that is a myth right there, that the 100% independence, that, oh, they're gifted, they can work on this all by themselves. That is one of the myths that I have definitely witnessed. And so we need to make sure that what is planned has intentional follow-up. And again, intentional follow-up that is partnered. You know, sometimes gen ed teacher can pull the student in for the small group, and sometimes the high cap teacher can pull the student in for a check-in, and then talking to each other, attending PLCs together, having common planning time together, and really trying to change that language from they can do your work when they're done with my work. I've heard this a lot. So changing that language, you know, so that the my work picture is something that's already united, and can serve those purposes of meeting the unique needs and nature of those kids. Okay, so these last few slides here are a whole bunch of links. So let me just go over a couple of them. How am I doing on time? Oh boy, I only have a couple more minutes. So I also wanted to leave time for questions. If anybody has any burning questions, add that to the chat and I'll try to get back to that. So these are 3 interactive notebooks that I have created. The 3rd grade one is a math PBL, and we identified students based on their iReady data and alignment with the standards that were being covered in the 6 weeks in the gen ed classroom. And then when teachers determined when my class, whole class instruction is something that the student doesn't need to hear, they had something else to go to, and they worked on this project. Let me see if I can click on it and if it will open. The students had a requirement to meet with me once a week. They had different ways of being able to work collaboratively. Again, even though they were all in different classrooms, we utilized Jamboard and the one where you create videos, which for some reason I can't remember what that one's called. And then, of course, they needed to email me. Gain feedback from me or each other, and make changes to their work. So this is what it looks like. And in the end, so there's a little bit of directions, and then on certain slides, they had this little target. And they needed, when they saw the target, they were supposed to think in their head, am I on target, Mrs. Bradley? And then they would send me an email to ask me to check their work. So they weren't supposed to go past the target without having received feedback from me. So that skill of being able to utilize their student email, but also real world skill, you need to check your email when you send a message. I might be able to look at it immediately, and I might take a little bit of time, a couple hours. So you need to, keep your window open, and just that skill of how to utilize their email for communication. Yeah, that's a good point, Paige. They still need help, even though they are high cap. Exactly. And you know what? A lot of times they have really terrible executive functioning skills, and it's actually part of those traits of gifted learner. So when we put that pressure on them that they need to be able to do things independently, it's just really wrong. But setting up systems where we can utilize the support and the knowledge of our high cap specialists, but also bring that into the classroom, I just feel like it's really, really powerful. So you can see in this slide, they needed to go to a link. So this is an interactive notebook, is one where there are different links for them to click on and ways for them to interact. So the link for the gallery walk was something that they needed to look at. And then when they got to the symbol, they would go to the Jamboard and put their comments on the Jamboard. So of course, they all, by this point of the year, knew how to use a Jamboard. But if they didn't, they would have had and needed instruction in that before I'd expect them to be able to utilize that. On this slide, there was a video that I made, one of those screencastify videos that was just about the site Wonderopolis and how to use the tools on Wonderopolis. And then they had an article to read and some vocabulary words to fill in. Then they had a building exercise where they needed to create a labeled plan. Does that sound like something in your standards? And then put an image of your plan in your notebook. So we also had taught previously in the year how to utilize the camera that's on all of their Chromebooks to be able to take a picture and insert that picture into their notebook. So these are third graders who are able to do all of these tech skills because it was something that we reinforced throughout the year, and they were motivated to want to do this project. Oh, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. Sorry. Anyways, at the end, you can see that there was a bunch of things in here, and you can see the targets. Then they would wait for me to respond. But also, we had a small group of about 10 kids from 5 different schools who were working on this. So there was one time in the week when we would all get together, and then we would review the things that kids had worked on independently up to that point. And so it did become a collaborative project, but the kids were really able to utilize their classroom time. But it also provided a chance for teachers to, identify the students who were just ready for more and have something like at their fingertips that they could, have these kids do. So it really worked out really well. And then these other two, if you're familiar with inquiry projects, Genius Hour is a kind of a buzz of a type of an inquiry project. In Genius Hour, it's more of like a passion project, and they work through a couple of slides in this notebook to try to figure out what their passion is, and they're kind of led a little bit more for a student designed inquiry. And this notebook kind of takes them through this. The Genius Hour, if you haven't heard of it already, again, this is like a training all in and of itself. But if you have a little bit of knowledge about it, Genius Hour can be incorporated for all kids in any classroom all year long. And it just depends on how you want to do it. So some teachers always have it as an option for something to be worked on little bit at a time. And then as students finish Genius Hours, they stand up in front of their class and they present. Other teachers have, like, everyone starts on this date, everyone finishes on this date, and we're all going to have presentations in front of, the whole second grade or whatever. So it can really be organized in as asynchronous of a fashion as you want it to. A lot of times with our high cap kids, they have these unique and very passionate interests, and maybe that opportunity to work on a Genius Hour type of project throughout the whole year, or even for snippets of time where they can just utilize that ability to have that hyper focus on a topic, would just really benefit them. So those are there for you to use. I designed all of those notebooks. These are some sources in case you wanted to just follow up on any more information. These are the links to the laws and regulations that I have mentioned, just in case you wanted to see what that was all about. Then I love this document, Advanced Learner MTSS Guide, and this idea of actually turning that triangle more into a rhombus, where we have these tiered systems of supports at all, for all kids. I love these two articles, 6 Myths About UDL and Incorporating UDL into Gifted Education in a Gen Ed Classroom. So love those things in case you're interested in more reading. And then I also had mentioned WayTag. If you are interested in those free monthly webinars, we have one tonight actually on UDL and blended learning, presented by Gen Ed teacher. She's doing a 2-part webinar. So the first part is tonight and the second part is in August. I also encourage you to attend our virtual conference. And if you're interested in the whole library of webinars, become a member. Okay. Do you have any questions? I just raced through that whole thing. Any questions? You are welcome, Sarah. I'm so happy to provide resources. And if you ever find yourselves in need of a certain type of resource, feel free. I provided my email address on those slides. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, you know what? One last plug for WayTag. If you know somebody in your building who is exceptional and would be able to provide a webinar for WayTag, please email me their name as well. It's so wonderful when we can celebrate the people in our trenches doing awesome things. So yes, you're welcome. I hope that you find those resources helpful.